מסכת בבא מציעא דף מ' המפקיד פירות אצל חברו, הרי זה יוציא לו חסרונות. לחיתימול אורז 9 חצאי קבין לקור, וליסורין ולדוחן 9 קבין לקור, לחוסמין ולזר פשטן 3 שאין לחור, הכל לפי המידה והכל לפי הזמן. If you have someone who owns some produce and he gives it to someone else to watch for him, then when the shomer returns it, the shomer is permitted to deduct the amount that that produce would have decreased. There's natural decrease. It could happen for a number of reasons. Maybe some mice ate a little while it's in storage, or it got dried out, and so now the volume is less, or for whatever other reason. So therefore, since there's a natural decrease over time, the shomer who takes a certain amount, he puts it in his storehouse. When the next year that he comes to return it, he can give a little bit less. Now, how much less depends on what type of produce it is. If it's wheat and rice, then the shomer deducts 4.5 kav, that's 9 halves of a kav, for each kor. That comes out to 1 out of 40 parts. Lisorim and dochan, for barley and millet, 9 full kav, not half kav, so this is double the amount. That's 1 out of 20. And for kusmin, for spelt and flaxseed, he can deduct 1/10. So that's, in other words, it reduces even more. So we're going on higher and higher amounts, 1/40th to 1/20th to 1/10. In other words, you can give 1/10. If you gave in 100 pounds, so then the shomer can deduct 1/10, because that's how much it naturally reduced. It would have reduced anyway if you kept it separately. And so therefore he only has to give back 90 of flaxseed. And everything depends on the measure and the time and how long it is. So these are the ratios, but this assumes for 1 year and for 1 kor. So if it's half a kor, then it will be half of that amount, or 2 kors, then it'll be double this amount. And if it's only for 6 months, it'll be half that amount. And if he's watching it for 2 years, then it'll be double that amount. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, v'chi ma ichpat lahen la'achparin, v'lo ochlot ben meharbe ben mikim'ah. However, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri disagrees with Tanna Kama and says, what do the mice care how much food there is? They eat the same amount, whether there's a lot of grain there or a little bit of grain. Rather, the shomer can deduct for the first kor, as was said before. But if there's 2 kor or 3 kor, 100 kor, the deduction is the same amount. It doesn't go by ratio, it's not by proportion. So they may disagree about what the decrease is because of. If it's simply because of mice eating, and there are 10 mice are going to eat the same amount, doesn't matter how much is stored there. But if it's other reasons, like it gets dried out or settles, so then it would be proportional. So anyway, Tanna Kama says proportional to the amount, which is more. And Rabbi Yochanan Nuri says, no, you only deduct from the first kor. All the rest of the kor, you have to give back 100%. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, אם הייתה מידה מרובה, אינו מוסיף לו חסרונות מפני שמותירות. Rabbi Yehuda even goes to a further extreme and says, if there's a lot of produce, then you don't have to deduct anything at all. Because if anything, it actually increases. It could increase due to extra moisture that now makes it bigger. And so, whatever decrease is when there's a lot is so negligible, especially according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, where the mice eat the same amount. So there's really a lot, then there's relatively little decrease, and if anything, there is actually increase, and therefore the shomer cannot deduct anything at all. He has to give back the entire amount. Ores tuba chaser. So now the Gemara asks, rice was in the first category that you can only deduct 1 out of 40 parts, but actually we see from experience that rice decreases more. Amar Rabba bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, but kaluf shanu, we're talking about shelled rice. That's why it's so little. But if it has the shell on it, then you're right, it would decrease more. Lechusmin lo zera pishtan shelosha sein lakor v'chul. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Chiya, zera pishtan begib olin shanu. So for spelt and flaxseed, we said 3 se'ah per cord, which is 1/10. Rabbi Yochanan said, that this is talking about while still on the stalks. That's why it decreases so much, because it's still on the stalks. But if it was removed from the stalks, then the decrease would be less. And these clarifications are backed up in a Braita, where it says that spelt and flaxseed as Bigiv Olin is when it's on the stalks, and Odes, if the Odes is not shelled, then it's going to be 3 Sein Lakor, which is that 1/10. So even rice that's not shelled would be 1/10. If it is shelled, then it's 1/40. Hakol lefi amida v'chule tana ken lechol kol vakor v'chen lechol shana v'shana. A Braita explains the Mishnah when it says it all depends on the calculation and the time. It means you have to deduct that percentage for every cord and for every year. You have to, if it's 2 years, then you have to give twice that amount, because every year it will deduct that much. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri v'chule. Tanya, Amru lo Rabbi Yochanan, harbe ovedot mehen, harbe mitpazerot mehen. Rabbi Yochanan says that the mice don't care. If there's 10 mice, they're going to eat the same amount. So they get the same amount from the first cord. And the more there is, the second, third cord, you don't have to deduct anything. So what's the response to that? To Rabbi Yochanan, the rabbi said, there's a lot that's lost or scattered when you move things around. So then it becomes less. It gets scattered, it gets lost, and that's why it does depend on the volume. There's 2 cords, and you deduct twice the amount. Tana b'medrim omrim she'ervanim perotav ava miched lo keren omer keren zavit omer lo hareh shelecha lefanecha. Braita says this whole Mishnah, it says Shomer deducts these ratios. That's only if he mixes it together with his own produce. Right, he had 100 pounds of rice, and his friend comes and gives him 100 pounds of rice, and he mixes it all together. So now when he deducts, he has to calculate, oh, you gave me 100, I'm only going to give you, right, this much back. But if he took his friend's produce and put it in a separate room, in a separate corner, so then he doesn't have to deduct anything or calculate anything. He just gives back whatever was given to him, and whatever deduction happened already there. You only need the calculation of the ratio when everything's mixed together, and so then you have to calculate, I know you gave me 100, but you know what, I only have to give you back 90. And we ask, wait, even if you mix it together, can't you then still figure out what was mine and what was yours? Right? If I had 100 pounds and you brought 100 pounds, we brought equal amounts of rice, let's say. So I'll just split whatever's left in them down the middle, and you take back what you had and what I have. I don't have to calculate a ratio, because I know how much I had and how much you had. So the answer is bistapek mehem. It's where the owner is using it. Right? He's eating from that rice the whole time, and so he doesn't, and so therefore he can't just split it down the middle because he took from it. So why don't you calculate how much he took? Right? How much did you take over this time period? You took a cupful a day. So the answer is he doesn't know. He didn't keep track of how much he took, and that's why he has to calculate according to the original amount. You deduct that percentage. Biuda says if the deposit was a lot, then actually it doesn't decrease. If anything, it increases, so you don't deduct anything. Kama midab meduba. When the Biuda says if it's a lot, how much is a lot? How much does he mean that from that amount above you wouldn't decrease, take out anything? Amar Baba Barchana, Amar Yochanan asara kurin, 10 cord. So anything less than 10 cord, there is deduction, but 10 cord or more, there is not. Tanya Nemehachi, Kama midam meduba asara kurin, and there's a Braita that says exactly the same thing. Tane Tana Kameh de Rav Nachman. A Tana, professional memorizer, recited this Baraita in front of Rav Nachman. במה מדברים המורים שמדד לו מתוך גורנו והחזיר לו מתוך גורנו. אבל מדד לו מתוך גורנו והחזיר לו מתוך ביתו, אינו יוציא לו חסרונות מפני שמותירות. So when do we say that the shomer deducts this certain amount, this percentage? Only when they measured it on the threshing floor, and then he returned it, measuring again on the threshing floor, because on the threshing floor they had measurements that were generous and generally big. However, if when the owner gave it to the shomer, he measured on the threshing floor, and then when he did the return, he measured it in the house, the home measurement vessels are more precise. Therefore, he should not deduct anything, because when he got it, it was already with an increased measure, so that the decrease would be built in. Since when the owner gave it to the shomer, he used the bigger, the larger vessels, and then when he returns it, he used slightly smaller vessels, so he's already returning less than he got, so therefore do not deduct anything further. Amar le bechi b'shuftani askinan teyahabeh b'chayla rabba v'shakle b'chayla zuta. So Rav Nachman said to him, what do you think we're dealing with fools, that you have to tell them that? That they would give a deposit with a big measure and take it back with a small measure, right? Obviously, this is the case. So the answer is Dilma b'mot hagoren kamart b'bamed b'memorim shemadad lo midot hagoren v'chazir lo b'mot hagoren av madad lo b'mot hagoren v'chazir lo b'mot hageshamim eno yosi lo chesron v'pnei shemotirot. Maybe what you meant to say is not that you measured it at the threshing floor as opposed to at the house, not the place, but rather the time. If the original measurement was done at the time of threshing, which is like around before the summertime, spring, summertime, so then and you return it also during threshing season, well then, yeah, that makes sense. That because during that time period it'll be the same volume from year to year. However, if the measurement was done during threshing time and then he returned it during the rainy season, meaning during the winter, well then do not deduct anything, because it expands. During the rainy season, there's more moisture in the air that goes into the produce, and the produce gets a little bit more volume. So if you measured it when the volume is less and first gave it to him, and then he returns it with the same volume measurement, and you fill up that volume measurement, but now the grain is swelled up because of the moisture, so then the deduction is built in. Do not deduct anything further. So that's an important thing to remember, and that makes sense that he had to teach that. Amar le Rav Papa l'Abaye, im ken livka kada, hava obada upaka kada, ibayet ema mishum isesa. There's a somewhat scientific analysis here, and question, right? If it's true that during the rainy season moisture gets into the produce and it expands in volume, then the jugs that they're stored in should burst, right? Because if there's a certain amount and now it gets moist and more volume, then you filled up a jug in the summer, and now the volume is more. How could it be contained? Wouldn't the jug burst? And so there's two answers. In fact, one time a jug did burst, right? They have empirical evidence. They tested this out, and they remember that, yes, one time a jug burst all of a sudden because the grain swelled. Or there's another answer. Generally, it doesn't burst because of compression. You can fit more into a jug if it's squeezed in there. And so when they put it in the summer, it was kind of loose, but now it's all squeezed in. And so that would be a reason why the jug did not burst. Next Mishnah is a continuation. Yosi lo shtut layayin. If there's an owner of wine and he gives it to a shomer to watch for him, when the shomer returns it, he can deduct 1/6 of the amount, because of two reasons. Some of the wine gets absorbed into the casket and some evaporates. So that's equal amount. Even if you had it in your house, it would be reduced that much. And so here also, right, you give me some wine, I mix it into let's say a larger vessel, so I only have to give you back to you 1/6 of what you gave me. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Chomesh. Rabbi Yehuda says 1/5, a little bit more. Yosi lo, you can deduct a little bit more. Yosi lo shelosha lugin shemen leme'a lo gomersa shemanim lo gomersa bela. That was for wine, but for oil you take out 3 log for every 100, 3%. Why 3%? Well, it's 1.5% for the sediment that sinks to the bottom, and 1.5% for what gets absorbed in the barrel. But if it's refined oil, then it doesn't have sediment. So then you don't reduce for the sediment, but you do reduce for the absorption into the jug, and therefore you only reduce it 1.5%. But if it was used jugs, that's good. That means the jugs already absorbed from what was in there before them, and so therefore you would not deduct for the absorption either. So if it's refined oil and it's in old jugs, then you'd have to give back 100% of what you got. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, אף המוכר שמן מזוקק לחברו כל ימות השנה, הרי זה מקבל עליו לוג ומכסה שמרים למאה. Rabbi Yehuda says this law applies not only to a shomer who is watching something for a while and then giving it back, but also to someone who sells oil. So normally, if you have regular oil, not refined, so then if you give me a set fixed price, let's say $100 for a barrel of oil, and then I'm going to sell you oil, and it will have the sediment in it if it's normal grade oil. However, if I'm selling you refined oil, not that you're paying for refined oil, you just asked for oil, I happen to have a barrel of refined oil, I, as the oil seller, can give you just 98.5% of the full amount, because I'm not selling you the sediment, right? Because it's refined oil. So if I was giving you regular oil, you would have gotten the same amount of oil plus 1.5 log of sediment. Since I'm giving you refined oil, I can just deduct the sediments totally and give you less oil for the same price, because it ends up being the same amount of oil. Good. Vela pilige, morikia today or morikia today. When we said up here that Tanakama says 1/6 and Rabbi Yehuda says 1/5 for wine, there's no machloket. They lived in different places, and because of the circumstances, different amounts applied. In one of the places, the first Tana, they coat the casks with wax, and so it does not absorb a lot. So that's why only a 6. But in the place of Rabbi Yehuda, they coat it with pitch, which absorbs more. And that's why he says you have to deduct 1/5. Or ibetema mishum gad gishtaha maisa tefe v'hatla maisa tefe. Or it could be the quality of the earth that they make these jars out of, that in one place they make it out of earth that absorbs more, and one from earth that absorbs less. Now this is Rav Yehuda the Amora, not Rabbi Yehuda from the Mishnah. Rav Yehuda, he made money selling oil, and in his place, 48 pitchers of oil could fit into one barrel. That was the standard size. And one barrel was sold for 6 dinar. For 6 dinar, you get 48 pitchers of oil. Paris Rav Yehuda shita bezuzah. Now he divided the all 48 into 6 pitchers for 1 dinar, right? 6 pitchers full. So he sold 6 pitchers for 1 dinar. So after he sold 6 times that, 6 times 6, 36, he made up his cost. Dal tilatin shveshita beshita. So now, how much of the 48 we can subtract 36. That's what he sold, and for that money he recouped his cost. Good. So now, what does he have left? Pashu le teresad. He has 12 left over as his profit. However, not all that 12 is profit. Dal temanya shitute. You have to subtract a 6th for the reduction, for what gets absorbed and for the sediment, as we just said. So he can't enjoy all that 12. 8 of it is going to be subtracted. The 6 of 48 is 8. And pashu lehu arba'ah. All he has left is 4, and that would be his profit, 4 jugs of oil for all his work in buying and selling the rest of it. Hold on. That means he only made, his profit margin is 4 out of 48. That's only 1/12. But Shemuel said that someone who makes a profit, you cannot make more than a 6, but you can make up to a 6. So why was his profit so little? Why didn't he charge more for the oil and make 1/6 profit instead of only 1/12 profit? And the answer is he did make more profit, because the barrel itself he can keep, and the sediments. The sediments aren't worth a lot, but they're worth something. And so if you add all that up, then it's more than a 12th profit. Hold on, that might be even more than a 6, and now he's making too much profit. How could he make so much profit? Well, there's also his exertion for selling it. That is, that all that time and effort is reduced, and also you have to pay for someone to put a tap in the barrel. That's also as a cost. So once you average everything out, the four pitcherfuls of oil that he's keeping, plus the barrel, plus the sediments that he keeps, that is the profit. He has the expenses are his effort and the tapping, and in the end it will come out to a 6th. Mishnah says it's for refined oil, he doesn't reduce from the sediment, and if it's an old cask, then also he cannot reduce any amount for the absorption. Now we say, really, you deduct 0 for the absorption? It's good, even if it's a used cask, it's still going to absorb something. So Rab Nachman says it's mezupapin, it's coated with pitch. So not only is it used, it's also coated with pitch. So that's why it's not going to absorb anything, and you can't deduct any amount of it. Rabbi says even if it's not coated with pitch, once a barrel is saturated, that's it. It's saturated, and nothing will be absorbed. In fact, it's 0 absorption, and therefore the shomer cannot deduct anything from that. Rabbi Yehuda omer, af hamocher shemen mezukak lachavero kol yemot hashana, harei ze mekabel alav log umechasa shemarin lame'ah. Now, Rabbi Yehuda said, also for someone selling, if he's selling oil at a price of regular oil, and he happens to have refined oil, then he can deliver for the same price of that would be 100 log of regular oil. He can sell 98.5 logs of refined oil, because there are no sediments mixed in that would normally be. So the buyer is receiving the same amount of oil. Amar Abaye, kishe timsa lomar ledivrei Rabbi Yehuda mutar la'arev shemarim, ledivrei chachamim asur la'arev shemarim. Abaye says from this machloket between chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda says you only have to deliver 98.5, and Chachamim say you have to deliver 100. Even if you're giving 100 refined oil, you still have to deliver 100 lugim of fine oil. So Abaye is going to deduce from these words, if you follow the logical assumptions of them, that you'll find that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the seller is allowed to mix the barrel and mix all the sediments. Usually the sediments, if you just leave it for a while, they go down to the bottom. But and that if you do that, and you sell from the top only, because you're skimming off the top as you sell. You put your ladle in, you take from the top. So normally, if you don't mix, you're giving only oil with the sediments on the bottom. If you mix it up, then any scoopful is going to have sediments also with it. So according to the Yehuda, it will follow that the seller is allowed, if he has regular oil, not refined oil that has no sediments, but regular oil, he is allowed to mix it first and then sell. So it'll have, whatever he's selling has sediments in it. But according to Chachamim, one who's selling regular oil is not allowed to mix it before he doles out the oil to the buyer. Let's see how this logic works. According to Rabbi Yehuda, must be that the seller is allowed to mix them up. And that's why when he has refined oil, he can tell him, listen, you have to accept the 98.5. Why? Because he could say, listen, if I had regular oil, and if I wanted to mix it, wouldn't I be permitted to mix it? I could just mix it up, and I would be giving you in there 1.5% of sediment. And so now that I'm not mixing it, I'm going to give you the same amount of oil, so I'm going to deduct a little bit for what the sediment would be, because otherwise you'd have to accept it no matter what, because I'm allowed to mix it. So we see that according to Yehuda, a seller is allowed to mix it. Now we say, but maybe the buyer could say, you know what, if you mixed it, then yes, I would have accepted the sediment, but at least then I could have resold it. But now what am I going to do with it? If we're assuming that the buyer is a reseller, so the buyer, when he's going to go resell it, he'll take it somewhere else and try to make a profit for the same amount of oil, but he needs 100 log of oil, or however much he's buying. If he goes to sell it and says, I know there's only 98.5, but there's no sediments. Nobody wants to buy it. They want to buy a full container of 100. So he says, so even though he says, listen, I'll take the sediments because I mix it in, and it's all mixed in as is normal for normal oil, and I could sell it as a full jug. Now you're giving me something that's less than a full jug. I can't sell it. So the buyer has a claim. Lechude la mizdaban li. What am I going to do? You're going to give me sediment by itself? Sediment by itself is not worth anything. I can't do any business with that. So we answer, we're talking about the case where a buyer is a homeowner, and he is happy that it's now filtered, because when he uses it, he doesn't want the sediment. So now he gets a benefit. Not only is he getting all the oil that he paid for, he also doesn't have to bother with the sediment later on. Okay, now we ask, why can't the buyer claim and say, listen, it's true, you could have mixed the sediment, but since you didn't mix the sediment, that means you renounced your right of the sediment to sell me sediment to me, and so now you still have to give me 100% of oil. You have to still give me all the oil, because you have to fill up 100 log of or whatever amount that I'm buying, and you could have mixed it. It's true, and then I would have had to accept some sediment. But since you didn't mix it, so that shows that you are renouncing your right to it, but you still have to give me all of it. So why can't the buyer make that claim? The Yehuda follows his opinion elsewhere, where he says that we do not assume renunciation. We don't assume that a seller renounces his right to something just because he didn't give it up front. We assume that he didn't. Anytime it's ambiguous, we assume he does not renounce his right. And we see this in the Mishnah in Masechet Baba Batra. Ditnan, machalo et hasemed, lo machalo et habakad. Machalo et habakad, lo machalo et hasemed. We have here that Tanakama says, if I sell you a yoke of animals, it doesn't mean I necessarily sold you the cattle. And if I sell you the cattle, you cannot assume that I sold you the yoke. I'm only going to sell you precisely what I said. That's Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Hadamim Modi'in. Rabbi Yehuda says you can tell by the money, right? There's a normal price for cattle, there's a normal price for yokes, and there's a normal price for both of them together. So just look at the amount of money, and based on that, you'll know if he meant to sell one or the other or both. Kesad, Amar lo mecholi simdecha b'matayim zuz, hadavar yadua she'ena semed b'matayim zuz. If someone said, sell me the yoke for 200 zuz. So everybody knows that that's too large of an amount. It doesn't cost 200 zuz for a yoke, and therefore he must have meant the cattle also. So Yehuda says we don't follow the words exactly as Tanakama said. You only said yoke, that's all I'm selling you. Rather, we follow the money. That makes sense according to Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda says we would not assume that the seller or the buyer are renouncing their rights to something, right? We're not going to assume that, I offered you 200 for just the yoke, and I renounced it, and I renounced my right to buy the animals too. I'm giving you a higher price just for the yoke. No, we do not say that. Right? If someone says, sell me your semid for 200 dinar, the 200 dinar shows that he wants the semid and the cattle. So, according to Yehuda, we follow the money, not the words, because we assume that the intention follows the money, because people aren't just going to give away something. Chamim say the opposite, that the money is not a proof. It could be that somebody wanted to overpay, or they agreed to get a lower price and they renounced the rest of it. And so therefore you have to follow the words exactly, not the price. So here we see that Rabbi Yehuda does not assume that a person renounces his right to something unless he specifically says, I renounce my rights to the sediment. He then means he does not. And therefore, the buyer cannot say that, since you didn't mix it, you renounced your right to give me sediment. No, just because he didn't mix it doesn't mean that. Rather, he could not mix it and give only 98.5% and say, well, you got the oil that you paid for, and assuming we're talking about a homeowner who doesn't want the sediment, is not reselling it, and so that he's fine with that. So there we see the connection between the Rabbi Yehuda's opinion and the assumption that the seller is allowed to mix it before he sells it. And now the next part of Abaye's statement, a seller is not allowed to mix it up and mix all the sediment from the bottom all over before he sells it. And that's why the buyer does not have to accept a deduction of a log and a half when he's paying for 100 log, because he can say, the buyer can say, if you wanted to mix it, would you be allowed to mix it? No, you would have to give me from the top pure oil. So now also that you're selling me pure oil, you have to give me 100%. In other words, it really doesn't matter whether the seller is selling regular oil or refined oil. Since he does not have a right to mix it, he has to deliver 100 log of oil. He will deliver 100 log of oil either way. So it's actually the other way around. Because he has to deliver 100 log of oil, that means that in a regular case, he cannot mix it. So you see in that case, because in that case, he's going to have to deliver that anyway. So he always has to deliver 100 log of oil. And so this is Abaye making a connection between these two issues and proving it. Amar le'Rapapa le'Abaye. But Rapapa counters Abaye. Adraba, ipecha mistabera. I can give you an argument that makes more sense the other way around. Le'divrei chamim mutar la'arev shemarim. V'hainu tamad la mekabel. Damar le medela aravt li, achule achilit li. According to Chachamim, they say that the seller is allowed to mix it. And that's the reason why the buyer does not have to accept it, because he can say, since you didn't mix it, it must be that you renounce your right to give me the sediments. In other words, you have a right to mix it. You didn't mix it. That shows that you renounce. And that's why I don't have to accept any less than the 100 log, because you have to give me 100 log no matter what. Yes, you could mix it. And if you did mix it, then that would show that you want to include the sediments. But if you didn't mix it, that means you're foregoing it. So you have to give me everything no matter what. According to the Yehuda, he would say that a seller of regular oil is not allowed to mix it before he sells it. And that's why he can force the buyer to accept a 1.5% deduction. Because he could say, listen, I'm selling you refined oil. Even if it was regular oil and I wanted to mix it, I would not be permitted to mix it. And if you don't accept the 1.5% deduction, then I'm not going to earn anything on the sale. That's all my profit if I give you an extra 1.5%. So we have to assume as if there's sediment mixed in. I'm not allowed to mix it. The sediment would be on the bottom. Or if it's refined oil, there is no sediment, but the profit that I'm making is based on that 1.5% margin. After all, someone who buys and sells for the same price, would you call him a merchant? He's not doing anything. He's not making any profit. So therefore, I can't make any money if I don't remove the sediment. So you have to assume it. I'm kind of like the shomer, but in the regular case, right? You give the shomer 100, he gives you back a certain amount less. because of sediments and absorption and all that. So he's getting less. Same thing here. I know you're buying a full amount, but the full amount after all the deductions for packaging and all that, and the sediment, this is the full amount. And if I have to give you more, then forget it. The deal's off because I wouldn't be making any money. Tana, אחד הלוקח ואחד המפקיד לפיקטים. This first baraita, we're going to see another one. This first baraita says whether a buyer or someone who deposits oil and now is getting it back from the shomer, either way, the law is the same for both of them regarding piktim, residue, his olive pits that float at the top, or murky oil that's not good, that stays at the top, different from sediments that go to the bottom. So the law is the same regarding both of them, but we don't know which way the law is. So we ask, what is the law here? Maybe you say both of them do not have to accept it. Just like a buyer of oil does not have to accept the residue on top. He could say, no, I want pure oil, and you can't deduct from it because of the residue. So too, if I deposit oil with you, when you give it back to me, I'm not going to accept it that it has residue on top. You have to give me the pure oil 100%, and you cannot deduct for the residue. If you say that's true, then the shomer could say, what am I going to do with your residue? You gave it to me, I'm giving you back the way it is, and this happens. The residue goes to the top, and now the residue's in there. I don't want your residue. I don't want to keep it and then pay you also a pure oil instead of it. So it doesn't make sense that a shomer would be responsible for paying and for keeping the residue and giving pure oil instead. Rather, must be they're both the same law in the opposite direction. That just as someone who deposits oil with someone else, he has to accept that there's going to be residue when he picks it up, and he accept that as part of the amount. So to a buyer, when he buys 100 log of oil, that some of the top is going to be residue, and he has to accept it. But is it true that a buyer has to accept it? Here we have a second baraita that seems to contradict. Because Rabbi Yehuda omer, lo amru sheman achor ela lamocher bilbad, shelokem mekabel alav lo gomeches hashemarim belo piktim. Rabbi Yehuda says that the loss of the murky oil is borne out only by the seller. The seller, he has to keep that murky oil because a buyer accepts upon himself only a deduction of 1.5 for the sediment, and he doesn't accept any further loss because of residue. So here we see it's the opposite of what we just concluded, that a buyer does not have to take the residue, and the first baraita says a buyer does have to accept the residue. So we answer la kashya hadehi blezuze betishre vekashakil mine benisan ki midat tishre hadehi blezuze benisan vekashakil mine benisan ki midat denisan. There's no problem. The first baraita that says the buyer has to accept the this residue, that's talking about where he paid for the oil in Tishrei, which is right after the harvest. And at that point, there's a lot of residue. So at the time he's paying, right, he's assuming he's paying for oil with residue. Even though the delivery doesn't happen till Nisan, when it's already ends up being purified, but still, when he paid for the Tishrei quality, which has residue in it. Therefore, he has to accept delivery with residue. Whereas the second baraita here of Rabbi Yehuda is where he pays for it in Nisan, and he also takes it in Nisan, because in Nisan already the oil is refined and doesn't have the residue in it. So when he pays in Nisan, he's paying, it's built into the higher price that he's paying for refined oil without residue, and therefore he does not have to accept residue as part of the delivery or any deduction because of the residue. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen v'Amen.